Ever left a family gathering early just to protect your peace?
I still recall that fateful evening at Antonio's Italian Bistro in the heart of downtown Chicago with a clarity that borders on painful. As if the entire scene had been seared into my memory through the intense heat of betrayal and the lingering aroma of garlic-infused marinara sauce wafting from the kitchen. Because it marked the moment when the fragile illusion of family unity shattered irreparably during what was supposed to be a celebratory gathering for my nephew's 18th birthday, an event that began with an invitation arriving in my mailbox 2 weeks prior. Elegantly scripted in gold lettering on thick cream cardstock that momentarily tricked me into believing perhaps this time my relatives might extend genuine warmth instead of the usual undercurrent of condescension that had defined our interactions for decades. Arriving early in my carefully chosen navy sheath dress, which accentuated my figure without demanding undue attention, I carried a thoughtfully wrapped gift for the young man, a high-quality leather-bound journal perfect for his habit of jotting down imaginative stories during those infrequent visits when he seemed genuinely pleased by my presence, and I settled into the booth beside Aunt Marjorie, anticipating that the free-flowing wine might eventually dissolve the tensions that always simmered just beneath the surface of our conversations, allowing for at least a semblance of normalcy before the arrival of the main courses laden with steaming pasta and herb-crusted proteins. However, the atmosphere shifted dramatically when my sister Linda made her entrance alongside her husband Mark and their two impeccably groomed teenagers, striding in with the confidence of individuals who believed the establishment belonged to them. And upon spotting me in my seat, her lips twisted into that signature smirk reserved for moments of calculated cruelty, the expression conveying without words that she held all the power in this familial hierarchy and viewed me merely as an unwelcome interloper in their exclusive circle. As the table gradually filled with the rest of our extended family, Uncle Ted and his relatively new wife Carla claiming the spots directly across from me, Cousin Jenny contributing her boisterous laughter that reverberated off the rustic exposed brick walls, and even Grandma Ruth making her slow, deliberate entrance with the aid of her cane, her gaze piercing through her bifocal lenses with an intensity that hinted at unspoken wisdom or perhaps withheld judgments. Everyone eased into the plush red vinyl benches, menus rustling like tentative peace offerings that masked the underlying hostilities waiting to erupt. And we proceeded to order a selection of appetizers, including a platter of calamari prepared extra spicy to indulge Mark's faint sense of culinary adventure. While the initial exchanges revolved around innocuous topics such as recent workplace developments and the unpredictable shifts in the local weather patterns, those safe harbors of dialogue designed to maintain a fragile truce until inevitably someone ignited the powder keg, which Linda accomplished with surgical precision once the entrees had been served, her veal parmigiana arriving in a cloud of savory steam as she leaned forward across the table, locking her eyes onto mine with deliberate malice and declaring in a voice dripping with false sweetness, "Rachel, maybe you should sit somewhere else, because this table is reserved exclusively for blood relatives," her statement landing with the weight of an anvil and causing an immediate hush to descend upon the group. Forks hovering suspended in midair and the ambient chatter from neighboring tables fading into a distant hum as the room's temperature seemed to plummet despite the periodic bursts of warmth from the kitchen doors swinging open to release the sense of baking bread and simmering sauces. The collective nods that followed her proclamation were subtle yet damning, Uncle Ted averting his eyes to focus intently on his plate of spaghetti carbonara, Aunt Marjorie suddenly absorbed in rearranging the leaves of her Caesar salad, and Grandma Ruth regarding me with an inscrutable expression that concealed layers of history behind her meticulously applied powder, each gesture reinforcing the sentiment that this exclusion had long been brewing in their minds, but required Linda's boldness to voice aloud, transforming what should have been a joyful occasion into a public execution of my place within the family fold. The flush of heat creeping up my neck stemmed not merely from humiliation, but from a profound, smoldering resentment that ignited deep within my core and radiated outward like flames consuming dry tinder, evoking recollections of countless childhood holidays where I received impersonal store-bought presents, while Linda unwrapped cherished heirlooms passed down through generations. or the subtle ways in which our mother would embrace her more tightly after our father's exhausting shifts at the manufacturing plant, murmuring endearments about true daughters that sliced through my sense of security more sharply than any physical wound ever could, yet rather than unleashing the torrent of emotion that threatened to overwhelm me, I composed myself with a measured smile, the sort one employs when mentally mapping out an escape route amid chaos, and continued savoring my chicken piccata as though her barb were nothing more consequential than an unappetizing garnish easily discarded, allowing the discussion to stumble forward into banal updates on the birthday boy's prospective college applications while my thoughts raced through the accumulated slights that had solidified my status as the perpetual outsider in this dynamic. When the desserts finally materialized, rich tiramisu for the majority and a slice of creamy New York-style cheesecake for Grandma, who savored it with deliberate slowness, the waiter, a courteous young man named Paolo bearing a noticeable accent from southern Italy and a professional bow with each interaction, compiled the final tally and positioned the leather-bound folder containing the bill squarely before Linda, totaling $320 precisely, his expectant glance directed toward her given her authoritative demeanor throughout the meal as if she were orchestrating an international summit rather than a simple family dinner. Without uttering a syllable, she slid the folder in my direction, her smirk evolving into a full expression of victory that anticipated my discomfort, and the table fell into another expectant silence. All eyes fixed upon me in anticipation of the unfolding spectacle, but I retrieved my credit card from my purse with unwavering steadiness, extending it to Paolo along with instructions to retain the full amount as gratuity, because in the grand scheme of life's trivial conflicts, precision in accounting paled against the necessity of preserving one's dignity, then rose gracefully from my seat while adjusting the hem of my dress, extending belated birthday wishes to my nephew from my vantage point across the now-charged space, where he appeared visibly uncomfortable yet remained silent in deference to the adult's drama, and pivoted toward the exit with purposeful strides, the rhythmic click of my heels against the polished tile floor echoing like the ticking of a metronome signaling the conclusion of an unwelcome interlude. It was precisely at that juncture, as I reached the threshold poised to step into the enveloping embrace of the October evening's crisp air, that a voice addressed me softly yet insistently from behind. "Miss, could you return for just a moment?" And I halted abruptly near the heavy wooden door, my pulse accelerating in response to the summons, realizing with a jolt that the speaker was not Linda or any other member of the party, but Paolo once more, gesturing me back with an item clutched in his hand that caught the warm illumination from the overhead chandeliers, a diminutive object glinting mysteriously and instilling in me an immediate sense of foreboding intertwined with intrigue, compelling me to ponder whether this interruption represented the cosmos offering an unforeseen opportunity for retribution or merely another convoluted strand in the intricate tapestry of deceptions that had defined my existence within this fractured family from the very beginning. Paolo's unexpected summons drew me back across the restaurant floor with a reluctance that mirrored the heavy pull of unfinished obligations in any strained family dynamic, the kind where one moment of vulnerability threatens to unravel years of carefully maintained pretenses, and as I retraced my steps toward the host's stand where he stood with that patient, knowing expression etched on his features, I could practically feel the collective scrutiny from our table intensifying like spotlights in a dimly lit theater production gone awry, Linda no doubt interpreting this interruption as an extension of her orchestrated humiliation rather than the neutral act of service it truly represented. While I wrestled internally with the impulse to ignore the call altogether and vanish into the bustling Chicago evening where the symphony of car horns and pedestrian chatter might drown out the echoes of her cutting remark about blood relatives that still reverberated in my ears with the persistence of a poorly tuned radio station. Approaching Paolo closely enough to discern the details of the item in his outstretched hand, I recognized it immediately as Grandma Ruth's cherished silver locket, the delicate chain dangling like a forgotten promise amid the clink of silverware from surrounding tables, and he explained in his accented English that he had discovered it wedged beneath the bench cushion during the routine clearing of dessert plates, presuming it belonged to me since I had handled the payment and appeared to be the one extending courtesies to the staff, his eyes reflecting a subtle awareness of the undercurrents of tension that had permeated our group's interactions throughout the evening, prompting him to return it discreetly rather than announce it to the entire party and risk further discord in what was already a charged atmosphere thick with unspoken resentments. Accepting the locket with a murmured thanks that masked the sudden surge of nostalgia it evoked, I felt the cool metal warming against my palm as fragments of past summers at the family lake house resurfaced unbidden. Memories of Grandma allowing me to clasp it around my neck during lazy afternoons by the water, regaling me with tales of its origins tracing back to a resilient great-aunt who had emigrated from Ireland carrying little more than determination and that very piece of jewelry as a talisman against the uncertainties of a new world, stories that always carried an underlayer of melancholy hinting at losses endured but never fully detailed. And slipping it into my pocket to shield it from prying eyes that might twist this small recovery into another point of contention, I offered Paulo a final nod of appreciation before committing to my departure once more, stepping through the heavy door into the brisk October air that carried hints of impending rain mingled with the urban sense of exhaust and street food vendors hawking their wares to late-night crowds. The short walk to the parking garage spanned just 2 blocks yet felt interminable as Linda's smirk replayed in my mind with relentless clarity, that condescending curl of her lips signaling her unshakable belief in her superiority, a conviction rooted in the preferential treatment she had received since childhood, when disputes over trivialities like the final cookie in the jar would inevitably resolve in her favor through parental intervention, leaving me to nurse quiet grievances that accumulated over time like dust on forgotten shelves, and by the time I unlocked my dependable Honda sedan, purchased outright with earnings from my marketing consultancy after a hard-won promotion that underscored my independence from familial financial entanglements, the initial wave of anger had evolved into a strategic simmer, propelling me toward the sanctuary of my riverside apartment where the city's nocturnal pulse visible from my windows often provided perspective on personal upheavals. En route, my phone vibrated insistently on the passenger seat, interrupting the soft hum of the engine and drawing my glance to a message from Cousin Jenny, the family's perennial mediator who navigated our clan's minefield with a diplomacy that bordered on exhaustion. Her text urging an immediate conversation regarding Linda's inflammatory comment and assuring me that the situation was far more nuanced than it appeared on the surface, followed by a plea to call her at once, which prompted me to pull over at the next intersection under the glow of a traffic signal, my fingers hovering over the screen as I debated whether this outreach stemmed from sincere empathy or merely obligatory damage control in the wake of the dinner's fallout. The ensuing drive home unfolded amid a torrent of flashbacks that illuminated the patterns of favoritism woven into the fabric of our upbringing, recollections of high school ceremonies where our father's applause thundered for Linda's academic accolades, while mine elicited only a subdued acknowledgement coupled with encouragement to persevere despite evident shortcomings, or the stark disparities in our mother's last will and testament that bequeathed the ancestral home solely to Linda and Mark under the guise of preserving bloodline integrity as articulated in the attorney's formal correspondence, a document that struck like a calculated blow and compelled me to reevaluate the foundational narrative of my adoption from an upstate agency. Following our parents' infertility struggles, a story repeated with comforting consistency yet increasingly shadowed by doubts in light of recent behaviors. Upon arriving at my apartment, I poured a generous glass of robust Merlot whose deep crimson hue mirrored the intensity of my swirling emotions, settling at the kitchen island to examine the locket more thoroughly by flipping it open under the pendant light, revealing a sepia-toned photograph of 2 young women whose features bore an uncanny resemblance to our mother and a girl who could have been my younger self, the discovery sending a ripple of unease through me just as Jenny's incoming call pierced the quiet. her voice emerging hushed and conspiratorial as if she were concealing herself from eavesdroppers within her own household, disclosing that Linda's recent outbursts concerning the family estate had escalated since our father's health episode the previous month, with demands to safeguard assets from perceived interlopers. That culminated in the pointed exclusion at the restaurant as a preemptive strike ahead of the impending reading scheduled for the following week. Yet there exists an additional layer to this narrative, Rachel, pertaining to documentation surrounding your adoption that the family has deliberately avoided discussing for reasons that extend beyond mere sentiment. My response emerged as a wry chuckle that bounced off the sleek surfaces of my modern kitchen, acknowledging the inevitability of deeper entanglements within our lineage where complications lurked around every corner, much like weeds overtaking a neglected garden. And I probed her for specifics only to encounter her evasive murmurs suggesting an in-person meeting at the cozy coffee shop on Halsted Street the next morning, since electronic communication felt too precarious for such delicate revelations, a proposal that left me with a tightening coil of apprehension in my chest as we concluded the call, the weight of the locket now amplified in my pocket like a harbinger of revelations yet to unfold. And in a bid to reclaim some agency amid the uncertainty, I retrieved my laptop and accessed the long-standing family group chat from which they occasionally overlooked my presence, uploading an image of the retrieved locket accompanied by a caption inquiring about lost valuables amid familial feasts and who might claim this elegant piece, the subtle provocation designed to unsettle Linda upon discovery without overt confrontation, deriving a quiet amusement from envisioning her reaction as a counterbalance to the evening's indignities in a manner that felt cleverly equilibrated rather than aggressively retaliatory. Closing the device with a sense of provisional empowerment, I prepared for bed only to be startled by the insistent chime of the doorbell echoing through the hallway, revealing Jenny on the threshold, uninvited and wide-eyed with a thick folder clutched protectively under her arm, her urgent whisper insisting that postponement until morning was untenable given the explosive contents of a missive from Grandma enclosed within, which promised to fundamentally alter the contours of the story we had all accepted as truth. And as she crossed the threshold into the illuminated space of my home, the door sealing shut with a definitive click that resonated like the onset of an irreversible confession, I braced myself for the deluge of information that threatened to either liberate or ensnare me further in the web of our shared history. Jenny's unanticipated appearance at my doorstep that evening transformed the quiet sanctuary of my apartment into an impromptu war room for unraveling familial enigmas. Her pallid complexion illuminated by the harsh glow of the porch light as she gripped the manila folder with the fervor of someone safeguarding state secrets amid a brewing scandal. And as I gestured her inside with a mix of apprehension and reluctant curiosity, the mingled aromas of my half-finished Merlot and her travel mugs, stale coffee hung in the air like precursors to the revelations about to unfold, both of us advancing cautiously into the living room where the locket lay splayed open on the coffee table, its miniature photograph of those two enigmatic women staring up accusingly as if challenging us to confront the discrepancies between the image and the stories we had long accepted as gospel within our tightly knit yet fractiously divided clan. She collapsed onto the couch with a sigh that spoke volumes of her internal turmoil, confessing that she had pilfered the letter from Grandma Ruth's cluttered desk earlier that afternoon during what was intended as a routine check-in visit, her insomnia following the restaurant debacle fueling a compulsion to intervene despite the potential repercussions of breaching such personal boundaries, and with trembling fingers she extended the document toward me across the polished oak surface, where I paused momentarily because one instinctive part of my being urged me to consign it unopened to the nearest wastebasket and cling to the comforting veil of ignorance that had preserved a modicum of peace in my interactions with the family, while the more insistent voice, honed by years of navigating their subtle exclusions and now amplified by Linda's overt cruelty, compelled me to accept it and unfold the brittle, yellowed pages inscribed with Grandma's distinctive looping script that chronicled a hospital mishap from 3 decades prior, detailing an alleged administrative blunder involving swapped infants and a solemn vow of silence undertaken to avert the disgrace that would have rippled through our conservative Midwestern community where appearances often trumped authenticity in the hierarchy of social standings. The contents blurred slightly under my gaze as the implications sank in, describing how her mother had delivered Linda in the conventional manner, yet I had originated from an adjacent delivery room in what the note portrayed as either a clerical oversight or something more deliberate shrouded in ambiguity, with the family opting for concealment to sidestep the ensuing chaos and maintain the illusion of a seamless sibling bond that had defined our household narrative ever since a disclosure that reframed Linda's invocation of blood relatives not merely as a spiteful quip, but as a barb laced with factual undercurrents I had never suspected, thereby intensifying the internal debate raging within me about whether to leverage this intelligence for immediate confrontation or bide my time in gathering corroborative evidence. A deliberation that ultimately steered me toward the latter course, despite its ethical gray areas, because charging in prematurely risked dismissal as hysteria, fueled by resentment rather than substantiated truth. We conversed deep into the night over refills of the Merlot that Jenny accepted tentatively at first, but then with increasing gusto, her revelations painting a vivid portrait of Linda's mounting paranoia regarding the estate's distribution in the wake of our father's recent cardiac episode, including aggressive maneuvers to expedite the sale of the lake house for her children's educational expenses while skimping on his medical necessities in a manner that bordered on callous opportunism. Details that stoked the burgeoning conflict within me as I grappled with the temptation to expose these hypocrisies publicly versus the fear that such actions might irreparably fracture the already tenuous connections binding us, injecting a thread of wry humor into the gravity when I likened our genealogy to a weed-choked thicket more suited to a gardener's nightmare than a family portrait, eliciting reluctant chuckles from her that momentarily diffused the oppressive atmosphere and allowed us to breathe amid the revelation's weight. Come morning, fortified by a hasty breakfast of toast and determination, I embarked on a solitary drive to the suburbs where Uncle Ted maintained his modest ranch-style home, positioning my vehicle discreetly across the street beneath the canopy of a sprawling oak tree and donning a nondescript baseball cap to blend into the unassuming neighborhood tableau of manicured lawns and minivans, the endeavor evoking the amateur sleuthing of those true crime podcasts I indulged in during solitary weekends as a means of vicarious thrill-seeking, and seizing the opportunity when he departed for his weekly golf outing without securing the side entrance, as was his habitually lax custom in this purportedly secure enclave. I slipped inside the dimly lit confines of his garage-adjacent storage area, the air thick with the musty scent of accumulated relics, and methodically sifted through cardboard boxes labeled with our father's meticulous handwriting until unearthing a file marked adoption records that quickened my pulse with anticipatory dread. Capturing digital images of the contents with my smartphone illuminated by the narrow beam of its flashlight function, the documents partially validated the letter's assertions through redacted names and timelines that aligned perilously close to my own birth date. A discovery that blended exhilaration with a profound unease because it underscored my foray into surveillance tactics I had previously decried in professional contexts when counseling clients on ethical business competitions, yet the allure of vindication overrode those reservations in the heat of the moment, propelling me to exit stealthily and return to the city just in time for the impromptu family barbecue orchestrated by Mark in a misguided attempt to mend the fissures exposed at the restaurant. An outdoor affair set in their spacious backyard, where the sizzle of burgers on the grill mingled with the laughter of cousins and the clink of bottled beers passed hand to hand. The gathering buzzed with forced conviviality under the late afternoon sun, platters of grilled meats and corn on the cob circulating amid small clusters debating everything from sports scores to vacation plans. And positioning myself strategically near Aunt Carla with my phone at the ready, I awaited the optimal moment during the obligatory group photograph session initiated by Jenny to capture the facade of unity, subtly adjusting the settings to blur Linda's position prominently beside Grandma's empty chair in a way that evoked the misplaced locket incident without direct accusation, then sharing the edited snapshot via the communal chat with an innocuous comment about treasures and spaces left vacant, making for the most telling memories. The result prompting Linda to nearly sputter her mouthful of condiments across the picnic table as murmurs rippled through the attendees regarding the heirloom's mysterious reappearance, a maneuver that delivered a satisfying undercurrent of witty disruption without descending into outright altercation, and left her visibly off balance amid the dispersing crowd. As twilight descended and the acrid wisps of barbecue smoke dissipated into the cooling air, my phone emitted a discreet vibration signaling an incoming message from an unidentified sender. The terse words: "You believe you've grasped the narrative, but bloodlines reveal far more. Anticipate a package in your mailbox by dawn." Searing into my consciousness and amplifying the internal turmoil, because this cryptic missive suggested entanglements extending to potential paternal discrepancies or concealed financial improprieties tied to my parentage, compelling me to withdraw from the festivities with polite excuses while the uncertainty burgeoned like an approaching tempest. Pondering whether my covert pursuits had awakened dormant adversaries or merely accelerated the inevitable unveiling of truths long interred within the family's collective conscience. That ominous text from the anonymous sender haunted my thoughts throughout a night fractured by intermittent wakefulness, the ceiling fan's monotonous rotation above my bed serving as a futile lullaby against the relentless replay of familial betrayals and half-formed suspicions that swirled like eddies in a disturbed pond, compelling me by first light to descend the stairs to my apartment's mailbox with a steaming mug of coffee clutched in one hand as a talisman against the chill of impending disclosures, only to extract a nondescript envelope devoid of postage marks and inscribed in stark block lettering with my name, its contents materializing as a single, grainy photograph depicting our mother in a hospital gown cradling two bundled newborns, one annotated with Linda's name in neat cursive while the other bore my own, but overlaid with a bold red question mark that slashed across the image like a verdict from an unseen judge, a visual accusation that chilled me to the core because it implied not mere error, but orchestrated deception embedded in the very foundations of our family's history, prompting me to secure it hastily within my jacket pocket, lest a neighbor glimpse the evidence of such intimate turmoil and ignite neighborhood gossip chains that thrived on the misfortunes of others in our close-knit urban enclave. With the meeting concerning our father's estate convened for that very afternoon in the somber confines of the downtown law office, a venue redolent of aged leather bindings and the sharp tang of fresh printer ink that always evoked images of irrevocable decisions etched in permanence, I elected to forego the communal transport arranged by the family in favor of independent arrival via public transit, reasoning that sharing a vehicle with Linda would equate to voluntary submission to an inquisition masked as casual carpool chatter, and upon entering the polished mahogany-paneled conference room where the group had already assembled, Linda posturing in her tailored power suit as if presiding over a corporate boardroom rather than a personal inheritance discussion, Uncle Ted nervously adjusting his tie in rhythmic tugs, and Grandma Ruth ensconced in a high-backed chair radiating an aura of detached omniscience, I claimed a peripheral seat at the elongated table, content to observe the dynamics unfold while the weight of the photograph pressed against my side like a concealed weapon awaiting the precise moment for deployment. The attorney, a bespectacled man with a voice as measured as a metronome, commenced by delineating the assets under consideration, appraising the family residence at $450,000 and the lake property at an additional $200,000. Figures that elicited murmurs of calculation from the attendees as Linda interjected repeatedly with pointed inquiries about accelerating liquidations to bolster her immediate financial needs, her tone laced with an urgency that bordered on entitlement as she invoked the imperative of safeguarding bloodline legacies amid our father's deteriorating health, phrasing that echoed her restaurant slight with eerie precision and reignited the smoldering embers of my resolve to dismantle her self-appointed supremacy through calculated exposures rather than impulsive outbursts. During a procedural recess, as the group dispersed momentarily to stretch and confer in hushed tones, Grandma Ruth materialized at my elbow in the narrow hallway. Lined with framed legal diplomas, her grip surprisingly firm on my forearm despite her advancing years as she drew me close and murmured that the veracity of your birth circumstances diverges sharply from the sanctioned tale, undertaken as a merciful intervention following your biological mother's untenable decisions, yet implored restraint in unearthing it further because certain veils, when lifted, only amplify discord without yielding harmony. Her counsel clashing discordantly with the letter's implications and sowing seeds of doubt regarding her true allegiances, whether she sought my protection or the perpetuation of the collective fiction that had sustained their social standing for so long. A crossroads that found me nodding in superficial accord while inwardly scheming to probe her veracity through subsequent interactions. A duplicitous strategy that felt shrewd yet corrosive to my self-image as the principled outsider in this tableau of moral ambiguities. The interlude for lunch at the adjacent deli introduced a fleeting levity to the proceedings, where platters of overstuffed sandwiches on rye bread circulated amid attempts at reconciliation. Mark endeavoring to broker amity through strained jests about familial bonds enduring thicker than the generous layers of pastrami adorning his plate, and I countered with a quip likening such ties to diluted pan gravy prone to separation under pressure, deliberately jostling my elbow against the table edge to simulate an accidental spill that doused Linda's pristine blouse with a modest splatter of the condiment, the mishap drawing a chorus of sympathetic laughter from the others as she fumbled for napkins to blot the stain. Her withering stare conveying volumes of retaliatory intent yet yielding no immediate reprisal in the face of the group's amusement. A light-hearted sabotage that evened minor scores with humorous precision without escalating to outright hostility and restored a sliver of equilibrium to my rattled composure. Resuming the session, the lawyer referenced an ancillary clause pertaining to disputed adoptions that could potentially nullify specific bequests, his gaze lingering inquisitively on me as if intuiting the undercurrents, prompting Linda to retort sharply that all matters stood resolved with no cause for exhuming bygone eras, her defensiveness fracturing the veneer of composure she had so meticulously cultivated and hinting at vulnerabilities beneath her aggressive facade. As the deliberations concluded with delegated responsibilities, Linda entrusted with the bulk of administrative filings, and I curiously assigned to inventory Grandma's personal effects in preparation for any redistributions. I exchanged perfunctory handshakes with the assembly, masking my inner calculations behind a mask of civility, only for my phone to activate with a voice recording from an obscured caller upon exiting into the bustling midday sidewalk thronged with office workers and delivery cyclists, the gravelly timbre conveying an imperative to rendezvous at the lake house under cover of night if desirous of the comprehensive account regarding Rachel's substitution, stipulating solitary attendance to ensure unmonitored discourse, a directive that rooted me in place amid the flow of pedestrians as the tension escalated palpably. Weighing the perils of venturing into potential isolation against the magnetic pull of enlightenment, the envelope's photograph now an insistent reminder in my possession as twilight loomed and I oriented northward toward the rural retreat, the atmosphere thickening with the presage of confrontations that promised partial illuminations laced with deceptions yet to surface. The journey to the lake house under the veil of encroaching night elongated into an eternity of shadowed introspection, the serpentine two-lane highway threading through dense stands of pine trees whose branches clawed at the starless sky as if pleading for secrets to remain buried. My headlights carving fleeting paths through the obscurity while a maelstrom of apprehensions assailed me concerning the identity and intentions of this clandestine informant, speculating whether the encounter might devolve into a Linda-orchestrated ambush designed to intimidate me into silence about the mounting irregularities surrounding my place in the family lineage, or if it heralded a bona fide ally poised to dismantle the edifice of falsehoods that had underpinned our existence for over 4 decades, and with each mile marker slipping past, my knuckles whitened around the steering wheel as the envelope containing the hospital photograph nestled securely in my jacket like a talisman of impending justice or further disillusionment. The familiar contours of the property emerging at last with its weathered wraparound porch groaning under the weight of accumulated memories, and the faint glow from interior windows suggesting recent occupation that heightened my vigilance upon parking beside. An unfamiliar pickup truck whose mud-splattered tires hinted at a visitor from the rural fringes of our social circle. Stepping out into the crisp air infused with the briny tang of the adjacent lake and the resinous perfume of evergreens stirred a cascade of reminiscences from childhood escapades, the joyful splashes in sun-dappled waters juxtaposed against the perpetual undercurrent of exclusion that positioned me as the perpetual observer rather than full participant in these retreats. And as a silhouette detached from the porch gloom to beckon me forward without introductory pleasantries, I ascended the creaking steps to recognize not the anticipated antagonist, but Rick, Jenny's reserved husband, whose days were spent wrenching engines in a dimly lit garage and whose reticence masked a perceptive acuity often overlooked in family gatherings. His gesture ushering me through the screen door into the warmly lit living room where threadbare quilts draped the sagging couch and the stone fireplace snapped with flames that cast dancing shadows across walls adorned with faded snapshots of happier eras. Without ceremony, he ladled steaming coffee from a percolator on the antique stove, its robust bitterness cutting through the chill that had settled in my bones as he launched into an exposition drawn from eavesdropped confidences between Grandma and Jenny coupled with extrapolations from our father's concealed journals stowed in the attic rafters, unveiling that my integration into the family constituted no accidental hospital transposition, but a premeditated arrangement wherein our parents had assumed custody of me as an act of benevolence toward a beleaguered acquaintance, my biological mother revealed as one of our father's professional associates who, entangled in a tumultuous union fraught with instability, had absconded westward after depositing me surreptitiously on their doorstep to evade repercussions, foregoing formal adoption proceedings to circumvent inquisitive bureaucracies and preserve the facade of an unblemished household in our tradition-bound town where deviations from normative structures invited relentless scrutiny and social ostracism. This climactic unmasking, delivered in the waning minutes of our nocturnal summit, refracted the entirety of my life through a prism of intentional omissions, as the family had colluded in this narrative of convenience to shield their reputations while Linda, privy to fragments of the subterfuge through overheard fragments, wielded them as ammunition to fortify her claims on inheritances born of perceived genetic primacy, her restaurant diatribe thus emerging as a symptom of deeper anxieties over my potential assertions to equitable shares if the veil lifted completely, and Rick supplemented the account with a proffered journal excerpt dated to the era of my arrival, our father's script confessing the ethical compromises they had embraced in the name of familial stability. Yet when I interrogated him regarding my progenitor's subsequent trajectory, he offered only vague assertions of a relocation to the Pacific coast bereft of contact particulars, a void that amplified the ambiguity enveloping my origins and left threads of inquiry dangling perilously like frayed ropes over an abyss. Emotions cascaded in a torrent fury at the protracted charade that had eroded my sense of self-worth, compassion for our mother's concealed sacrifices in perpetuating the illusion, and a resonant emptiness for the authentic connections I had pursued in vain amid their conditional affections, yet amid the upheaval. The architecture of retribution I had meticulously assembled reached its apex in a maneuver both ingenious and resonant with the initial slight as I activated my phone's recording function to chronicle Rick's testimony, not for extortionate purposes, but as a personal archive of validation. Then dispatched a condensed audio clip to the family digital forum accompanied by a digitized replica of the restaurant bill from that incendiary evening, captioned with a succinct declaration of accounts settled irrespective of sanguine affiliations, and appended a forwarded correspondence to the estate attorney incorporating anonymized excerpts from the journals that advocated for a parity in asset apportionment reflective of de facto kinship rather than contrived pedigrees. The cascade of ensuing alerts illuminating my screen with Linda's indignant missives yet eliciting no counteraction from me as the gratification derived from this cyclical reprisal, which looped back to that $320 ledger as an emblem of fiscal and figurative equilibrium, infused a wry satisfaction in witnessing her edifice of superiority teeter without necessitating vocal confrontation or physical escalation. Rick observed with a nod of solidarity, affirming that the moment had ripened for accountability to supplant evasion within our ranks, but as I departed the house with the lake's dark waters murmuring against the shore in rhythmic indifference, a persistent haze of irresolution clouded my departure because extending forgiveness appeared untenable in the face of such foundational duplicity, while propagating further disclosures risked imperiling our father's tenuous well-being. In his convalescence, compounded by Jenny's preceding voicemail intimating her withdrawal from the fray now that the Pandora's box stood ajar, propelling me southward along the desolate road with horizons blurred by fog and introspection, contemplating whether to embark on a quest for my biological antecedent amid the vast western expanses or permit the antiquity to submerge akin to the dilapidated pier extending into the murk. The trajectory ahead fraught with bifurcations that proffered no tidy resolutions, merely the subdued empowerment of authoring my narrative henceforth, unencumbered yet haunted by the enigmas that family, in all its flawed complexity, perpetually bequeaths to those bold enough to interrogate its truths.